all the questions at the end of the session, but please don't be shy in asking questions. I'll also be displaying a QR code for you to scan with your phone in a moment, and that will get you into a little tool called Mentimeter, where we'll be asking your opinions about all matters related to MMC. So I now need to share my desktop. So Manjeet, could you just say yes if you can see my screen?
Yeah, I can see it.
That's perfect. So one of the features of Zoom, which I particularly like, is that once I start sharing my screen, I lose sight of my fellow speakers, which makes things slightly difficult. Anyway, welcome to the session. What I'd like you to do, audience, if possible, please, either use a browser and go to menti.com, where you'll be prompted for that 8-digit code, or alternatively, just use your phone and scan the QR code that you see on the screen. I'm very quickly going to just slide across to the live version of that. And I'll give you a moment or two just to scan that. So when you've done that, you'll see a little tab. It'll take you into Mentimeter, and you'll see something like the word instructions on your screen. And when you can see that, just pause, because I'm going to ask the first question in a minute or two. Great. So what you'll see over some of the slides coming up is that I've replicated that QR code on a number of our slides. So if you don't see it immediately, if you're not quite in yet, don't panic. Just use the phone to scan the QR code from a different slide. Okay, so let me just make a few introductions very briefly. I'm Dave Emmer. I work for the Supply Chain Sustainability School, and I lead on the development of our MMC and off-site learning materials. Long experience in the industry, longer than I ever thought I'd be in any industry. Manjeet, would you like to introduce yourself, please?
Thanks, David. Hi, everyone. I'm Manjeet Rana. I work for National Highways. I'm the head of Sustainable Commercial Improvement, and I've been looking at how we can look at industrialised construction, modern methods of construction into the highways industry.
Great. Thanks, Manjeet. Our next speaker is John Armitage. John, would you say hello?
Yeah, John Armitage. I'm a technical director at Ramboll, working in the bridge teams, but leading for Ramboll on modern method construction and how that interacts with the design process.
Thank you, John. Michael?
Yeah, hi everybody. Michael Schenk from Balfour Beatty, head of research and innovation. Quite a few years experience in modern method, and super excited about the stuff that we're up to and working with everybody on the call in this space.
Thanks, Michael. And finally, Jordan.
Yeah, hi guys. Jordan Flint here, Managing Director at Kier for Design and Engineering. I'm part of the National Highways Industrial Construction Group and MMC Group, but also headed up on behalf of the Kier Transportation business. So good to see you all.
Great, thank you, Jordan. So as I said at the beginning, each of our speakers is going to talk briefly, and there'll be plenty of time for you to ask questions. Essentially what this session is about is that National Highways perceives modern methods of construction and off-site construction as being a way of delivering projects in a sustainable, reliable, high-quality manner. And they very much encourage the supply chain to engage with them in bringing innovation to the fore. And what you're going to hear today actually is from Manjeet how National Highways essentially have created a suite of categories that complement the categories that many of us know and love, but actually add a level of knowledge to the components and systems that reflect the fact that they're working very much in the infrastructure world. And then John and Michael and Jordan will be talking about the work they've been doing that complements this process. So Manjeet, I'm going to hand over to you first of all. If you want me to change slides, just shout out to me.
Amazing. Thanks, David. I just wanted to start with saying a little bit about what is industrialised construction, what is modern methods of construction. It is a broad term, probably misunderstood or having different interpretations across our industry. So I've picked out the one that the Institute of Civil Engineers have recently issued, which is that industrialised construction is about setting an environment to allow innovation to happen at speed. So we've all heard about project speed, the fact that we're trying to speed up our projects, but we also want to incorporate different types of innovation and methods of working so that we get faster, better, quicker, more sustainable. Thanks, David. Next slide. So starting with a little bit of context around why is industrialised construction and modern methods of construction important to us? It's really linked to the productivity agenda. So traditionally, if you look at academic papers and you look at reports about our industry, often they talk about us having a fragmented industry and impacting on our productivity, particularly with productivity growth in our industry being 21% lower than in the wider UK economy. And that's impacting on the value that we're able to deliver, and it's impacting on the value of the investment that we're making. So the construction playbook, for example, is particularly promoting modern methods of construction, as a way of responding to the productivity challenge. So key highlight there is that the productivity challenge is one of the key points that we're trying to address through the modern methods of construction agenda and the adoption of innovation. Thank you, David. The second thing I wanted to go in a little bit around the whole productivity and industrialised construction piece is one of the issues that we have, having the industry that we have, which is large and it covers lots of different types of infrastructure. We need to set the right environment to be able to adapt to industrialised construction and bring the modern methods of construction in. So the ICE have picked out 3 key areas where we need to work differently. The first one is around people and culture and mindset and moving away from the traditional way of doing things and thinking more widely around how value is contributed at each stage of our process, each point of our value chain. The second one is that we need to really embed our best practices and drive continuous improvement. And one of the areas where we can probably do better and need to be more adaptable is around extrapolating all the good innovations we have in our industry and putting them out to other projects, and not just stopping project by project, but really thinking and challenging ourselves about whether we're really taking things into other projects and thinking programmatically. And the third one is, at what point are we adding the value? Do we really understand our value chain and our end-to-end process? Are we bringing the innovations in at the right point? And John's going to tell you a little bit more about this a little bit later on, in terms of, are we bringing all the innovations in at the design stage? And are we looking and optimizing on those areas of where we can bring modern methods of construction in at the right point? Or are we losing value? And at what point are we losing that value? So the next slide, please, David. So I spoke earlier about industrialised construction, modern methods of construction being a very broad term. So on this slide, I just wanted to point out some of the key components of what we're talking about, and that being demand planning, because we need a pipeline to be able to really plan ahead and capitalise on the procurement opportunity. The digital piece, the off-site construction, as David has mentioned. Some of the recent developments that have happened in our industry, such as AI, 3D printing, which I know we already use. Some things we already use, probably we need to extrapolate them more. But the whole composition of industrialised construction isn't just about off-site construction, it's the whole piece, and includes logistics too, and whether we're really analysing and looking at our logistics when we're deciding and planning our projects. Also a little bit about the benefits. So here I've got some of the things such as it's repetitive, faster, standardised. We're more adaptable to the adverse weather that we traditionally suffer with in our industry. really looking to question and challenge ourselves in our industry in terms of our adaptability to future skills, and whether we're looking at our business models in terms of new talent and future skills to be able to respond to the skills challenge that we currently have. And also this morning, for example, I read about a piece that came out this morning around plastic waste and the packaging in our industry. And if we did more things off-site and we adapted and worked differently, could we be removing some more of that packaging? So the figure that I saw this morning was that we have a 15% higher plastic waste and packaging in our industry than the other European countries do. And that's a challenge that we all know that we have to respond to. So if you could go to the next slide, please, David. And finally, I just wanted to say, talking about the language again, we have as a group put into place a 7-category framework where we can start looking at our language and hanging our work off these different areas and different categories. So we want to do some work around that, and John's going to bring this to life in a little bit for you. Thanks, David.
Thanks, Manjit. So what we thought, audience, at this stage, if you've still got your phones in your hand, I'm going to move the Menti forwards, and we'd like you to be thinking about what might be the barriers or difficulties or challenges that you perceive if, as a sector, we transition towards adopting modern methods of construction, digital construction, and so on and so on. Now, I'm going to take the screen share away from this slide, but it'll still be open on your telephones. So take your time to have a think about that, put in some of your thoughts, and we'll revisit this towards the end of the session. So although it'll disappear off your screen now, it'll stay on your phone and you can continue to work on that. So thank you, Manjit. And as Manjit said, we're now going to have a word with from John Armitage from Ramboll, who, John, I think you're going to talk more about the way we categorize different MMC systems, products, and so on.
Yeah, so we have 7 categories for MMC, which have come through from the Ministry for Housing, Communities and Local Government. But I think they've been quite focused on the more building market for a while. And what we've done through working with National Highways and others is to look at how those categories reflect in. And Manjit's just shown the categorization that's been done. What I was hoping to do is show a few more detailed examples. It's important not to get hung up too much on what goes in what category, because there's quite a few things that could go in more than one category. But actually, it's a good framework to do, and then to actually help to drive change in the industry. Okay, next slide. So out of those 7 categories, we have 4 structural categories. And there's a range of different items that could go into this. Now, category 1 it's complete modular 3D units. And the example I've got there is actually a very large modular unit, which was the M42 overbridge that was moved in for HS2 before, which is one very large 3D unit. But also we've got things such as MS4 standard gantries. So that's one item. It's the pre-assembly of a complete unit. Category 2 can drift more into 2D primary structural elements. And there's actually quite a lot of these that are used commonly. We've got precast arches, we've got culverts, units, precast portal frames. I've actually got a rail example there for some precast arches that we use down in Bermondsey in London. But it's using these systems, 2D systems, to form complete structures that when they're assembled. Category 3 moves into pre-manufactured components. So mass engineered components connected together. We could be looking at items such as permanent formwork. But the example we've got there is the use of the precast shell abutments, which have been used in a number of places, ranging from HS2 through to M25 Junction 10, which is currently under construction at the moment. And that's led to some quite significant improvements in productivity. So that's been very positive. Category 4 is additive manufacturing, which can be 3D printing, it can be slit forming of units using standard designs, molds, and printing. Now, the example that we've got there is from the M25 widening that was done at junction 27 to 30 a few years ago, where retaining walls of up to about 1.8 meters high were slit formed. So that's a good example of what can be done. Clearly quite a high setup cost in terms of the molds. Once you get going, very efficient indeed. Next slide. We then move into non-structural categories. Category 5 is focused on the non-structural components, but when they're assembled, they make an asset. A good example of that is the cabinets used for gantry and ITS, or we could have preformed utilities. Category 6 is the more traditional building products, non-structural elements, but you can get much faster assembly, so cladding units. But there was a good example on Manjit's slide of a V-ditch bucket that's used to form things quickly. Category 7 is the site-led process improvements using innovative oriented solutions. But we've got things like drones, robotics, autonomous plant. But again, it's important to think about how early on we can drive those processes early stage in the process. Okay, next. So the implications of industrialized construction. Many of you will be familiar with the reduced access requirements, less constrained work sites. Reduced number of operatives is very important. Improving program, improved certainty, moving work off the critical path. Reducing costs and increased certainty, and bringing constructability at the heart of the design. And part of that process to come through is this whole idea of planning slow, then the ability to deliver fast. But you've got to get your planning right to be able to deliver fast when you get there. We then get a big advantage, the ability to learn and improve and then repeat. When we've been designing stuff bespoke for many years, it's much harder to get that learning process into place, whereas actually we're now seeing that we can get the learning process in when we're following the industrialized construction. And a big thing that was mentioned earlier was about improving. To get productivity improved, you have to get there. A lot of the work you have to do prior to construction itself. And so what we're seeing in terms of implications of industrialized construction for design, it's the earlier collaboration, integration. You need that early work to come together and work together. It's actually integrating products into the design process, and it's then bringing that learning and feedback in. And still this, I think, as well as well highlighted, was about having the right people, the right culture, and the right mindsets, and how we develop that. So yeah, very important to see how design comes through and how that influences it. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, John. So I'll just move over to the next slide on the Menti. So I can see that some of you have already identified some barriers and challenges. Question 2 asks you to think about what you perceive as what some of the benefits might be. While you're thinking about that, a couple of comments to make on John's presentation. One is that he ran through the categories, and I think he said, let's not get hung up on this. And I absolutely agree with that. But nevertheless, I think the categories are extremely useful for us to understand what a broad church this is when we talk about MMC. And I think it's quite significant that of the dozens of MMC and offsite workshops I've run with hundreds of attendees, very often I'll go through the categories with the attendees, then do a little fun quiz to say, well, what category do you think this system or this component fits into? And I've never, ever yet had any audience answer every question correctly. So on the one hand, it's great that we're trying to understand what we mean by it, but on the other hand, don't get too uptight if you can't easily categorize something. The second point I wanted to make was, John, you referred there to industrialized construction. And I know from working with National Highways that that's a phrase that I think is going to develop, will work towards using industrialized construction rather than modern methods of construction, certainly in the infrastructure sector. And finally, I love the diagram you showed us that begins with plan slowly and deliver fast. I think that requires that genuine shift in mindset, that we shouldn't just rush in do what we've always done. Let's step back, take time to plan this project, and doubtless the delivery will benefit from that strategy. So thank you, John. I'm going to now hand over to Michael from Balfour Beatty, and you're going to talk about sharing your approach to adoption of MMCH.
Yes. Hello, everybody. So you can click through about 6 times, I think, on this one, David, to start with. So just a couple of points just based on what John was saying and what David just said then. I think one of the biggest pieces around how we move towards this umbrella term of industrialized construction, and I'm going to use it as the umbrella. And then we have lots of methods that sit underneath it in terms of within the categories and the way we go to work, is the way I like to look at it. Because when you think about it, when we're looking at a project level, it's all about integration. So whether you're at a product base, or you're at a component base, or you're at a structural base, it's all about sort of integration. And that's that sort of industrialized piece that says, how do we do it for end to end? But as individual contractors or product owners and bits and pieces, you might not use the word industrialized construction, but you might be talking about the methods and the modern pieces that you might do. And I think the other part is the word modern method is also can be confusing in some regards, because actually some of the methods that we're talking about aren't actually modern. We've been doing it for decades. But what we try to start to think about is actually how we start to bring all this stuff into how we go to work. And when we think about the 7 category framework, one of the things that it's hard to give someone a blank piece of paper and say, great, here you go, write down all the things that you do that are modern method, or all the things that you're doing on your project that might fit into one of these categories. And when we did that exercise, we found it to be, you got 1 or 2 answers, and you might get the really big ones. I've got a gantry, I've got a structural bridge, I've got something. But actually, when you start to utilize the work breakdown structure that National Highways operate under, and most of us operate under, when you start using that as your framework to have those conversations, all of a sudden, you start to think about a lot more of the things that we do, products, processes, ways of working that we start to do. And then all of a sudden, it really balloons your ideas on what we could actually be talking about when it comes to the way we go to work. And a lot of the stuff, and I come from a building background and now work in highways, and I would challenge the narrative. When you read a lot of the reports and a lot of the documents and publications, it's all about building. But actually, I think that we're probably more advanced, if not the most advanced sector, in terms of how we go to work and the products that we use and the standardization, repetition, and bits and pieces that help drive the basis of modern method and industrialized construction. So just to set that sort of scene. And when you apply and you look at, and when you run workshops on your projects or within your own business, and you start asking yourselves the questions around and using the work breakdown structure, when you're having those conversations, you start to see more. And when you start to, and we did this on one of our projects, we've now done the majority of our projects within Balfour Beatty in highways. And this is sort of the distribution you start to see in terms of products and components. Now, the interesting thing is, and as Jordan said, try not to get too hooked up on whether it's in a category 6 or it's a category 1. So what you'll find is we start with a lot of products, category 6, 5 and 6 areas. And then when we start to integrate them and we start to work together and as a collaborative project, actually we start to shift things along to the left. So we're building things offsite. So a offsite fabricated bridge or a near site fabricated bridge will bring lots of components together, create a 3D component or 3D structural form, and then we roll it into place. Well, that would be the category 1 scenario, but there are lots of things that we do within category 5 and 6, and even the processes of category 7 that actually all support that end product. And when you start thinking like that and start to understand that breakdown, as I say, all of a sudden, for me, it becomes really exciting about the things that we can do. And what we also noticed when we did our benchmarking is when you start thinking about it, something like 60 to 70% of the things that we do are in categories 5, 6, and 7. Yet we don't really talk about those things in 5 and 6 specifically. We talk more about the stuff at the far left end. And this just brings the piece back that having 7 categories, not 7 levels, but 7 categories, is just a way in which us to structure the conversation and the ways we go to work. And when you talk about just the 7 categories, it is literally just that. They're just, we've literally put something into the box and we've gone, great, we're modern method. If you go on to the next slide for me, David. So as part of some of the work that we've been doing with National Highways, we started thinking slightly differently and saying, well, how do we supercharge this idea of the 7 category framework and make it really valuable to how we go to work? And what we said, actually, what you find is actually we have levels of improvement, and someone will go, well, a precast concrete chamber isn't modern method, but it is. And there's multiple ways to look at it. What we say is that's you're doing your basics. That's just doing componentization, repetition, and standardization and such forth. That's level 1. But then all of a sudden, with the likes of carbon coming in and bits and pieces and new materials starting to develop and change the way in which that precast unit's made, all of a sudden you might have a low carbon concrete versus a traditional based mixed concrete, and your carbon footprint's better. Therefore, in theory, from a carbon perspective, that product now goes higher up in terms of it's now doing the basics really well. We're starting to think differently. So this then starts to challenge the way in which we engage the workforce, or engage our supply chain, engage our suppliers, to challenge and start to go back to the Manjit slide, which showed the productivity gap and the fact that construction's plateauing and everybody else is doing so much better. Well, actually, we're driving that ability to bring that and, change the crocodile jaw to close it up a bit further. When you start looking at things like this and you start looking at the model and start applying these levels, now we can really start to drive innovation. We can really start to drive the way in which we might coordinate. You might look at 3 different products. Let's say a lighting column comes in 4 components, but how do we now start to integrate all of that? And we start moving that to the left. But what it also means is we can now drive improvement vertically. So no longer do you have to just go off-site. You can now really start to consider ways in which to improve a physical product. And this is where we start to challenge the likes of the ACLM, is the automatic cone laying machine, from someone running around with components and dropping them onto the ground, to putting them out of the back of a wagon, to actually automating it. That's that challenge of doing it vertically. If you go on to the next slide for me, David, and the other example is what this now starts to do is it enables us to challenge those areas that you would think weren't even in the space of modern method. For example, earthworks. It's a category in the WBS structure. You might go, well, we don't do a lot of that space because it's not offsite manufactured. But actually, this is where we start to look at things like the equipment that we use, and we start to challenge the norm. So things like the V-ditch bucket or the earthworks blade might be the basics. You then start to throw in 3D machine control. So we're using digital capabilities to start to help drive the way in which we move material around. You then go into remote control, then you go to full automation. So all of a sudden, we are, in actual fact, modern methodizing the earthwork movement. So what we feel as the group is that this type of model starts to drive a hell of a lot more opportunity than just saying, let's go and build a building out of panels or concrete or something. This gives us the ability to go and challenge at every level to see improvement across the board. That's the vertical improvement, but then there's the potential to go for a sideways movement. And we've mentioned a couple already, but in the next example, if you can click twice for me, David, is, our VRS system, still barrier systems. They're all components. They all come to site. They're all assembled. But actually, when you then start to look at and you start thinking about combining those things and putting them onto a platform, you can get something like the Smart Raft, which is a 3D structural component, which is a product you can go out and buy now. Some of this stuff is available to us. But then you start thinking about, well, what are the other things you can put on that platform, be it lighting columns, be it comms cabinets, be it whatever it might be. How do you start to drive and change and challenge And this is where this type of model gives the project teams the ability to first and foremost benchline or benchmark their project, and then go in and use this to start challenging opportunities, which brings that back to lessons learned, the stuff that Manjit spoke about, which then throws back into databases. And we should just be saying to ourselves, why are you using a level 1 when you could be using a level 2? This will help us drive the change in our industry much faster and start to get the uptick in the plateauing of what we do. And all of this is then sort of wrapped around, well, how do you specify where something sits vertically? And that's the next level of work that we're working on to help drive that conversation. I think that's my 10 minutes, David.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Michael. What I thought was significant in all these presentations, beginning right at the beginning of Manjit's, is where she said the first thing you address is people and mindset and the way we think about things. And what I think you've shown, Michael, is a great example of that, about how you might think through a problem and come up with an innovation. So thank you for that. What I'm going to do now is move on to the next Menti question. And what we'd like to know from you now is, what can the supply chain do to help overcome some of the barriers that you may have identified earlier on? We will take time to go through all your responses on the Menti, but I'm going to leave that question open on your telephone for you to have a think about and have a go at answering. Meanwhile, I'll go back to the slide deck and go over to Jordan Flint from Kia, who's going to talk through about some of the ways the industry is responding and contributing to this industrialized construction mindset. The floor is yours, Jordan.
Brilliant. Hopefully I'm coming through okay.
Loud and clear.
Perfect. Hello, everyone. Again, hope everyone's doing well. Yeah, some good presentations there. So I'm going to sort of just build on some of the discussion and the presentations so far. It was really interesting to see Manjit's presentation, and I think the work that Michael has brought forward there from Balfour's to look at how we shift vertically is really interesting and really gives us a focus to do that. I think the reality is we all do MMC, industrialised construction, in different ways. So we're all doing it as part of our day job, but actually capturing it and then trying to turbocharge it is a really good thing. So one of the things that we're doing, just from a high level, are these industry and company groups. So the people on this call are all part of National Highways Industrialised Construction Group, MMC Group, that Manjit chairs, and it's a great collaboration of all of our teams and the supply chain from National Highways coming together and really collaborating, sharing best practice, and helping us to align to a central strategy. So that is really working quite effectively. And then I suppose if you take it down a level, and this is not just Kia, I'm sure all of the different supply chain have got them, we then have an MMC working group within the Kia business with different arms and legs that make sure that we are, again, sharing best practice and looking at how we work. Some of the big work that we're doing is in what Michael and John have described there, in really capturing a robust baseline of the work that we're doing, so we fully understand it and then allow us to sort of shift vertically and really move our ways of thinking on. David, next slide, please. So we're doing a lot of work, I think, is across the board with learning from others and developing our processes. So we're learning a lot from the building sector and making sure that comes across. The Kia business have got some really good examples, as well as others, where we're doing prison programs where we're developing around 80% of our products are off the shelf and standardized, which really helps us to move things on. So there's lots of learning going on that we help to bring into the National Highways world. We've developed lots of tools around MMC calculators that help us to sort of really understand where the benefits are within which areas of MMC. We're doing lots of work around how we put values to the different elements of MMC. I think one of the big things that we're doing is our MMC workshops. So a lot of our projects now will start off with a very early workshop on each project that looks and prompts us to really drive some of the MMC ideas through. So the work Michael shared there, they're a big part of it, that we consider those areas, and it prompts us to sort of drive some of those areas through. David, next slide. Within Kia, and again, probably not necessarily just Kia, but we've got a brand that helps us drive our MMC strategy called the Choice Factory, and it's relatively straightforward, but it's a central place that we keep all of our strategy documents, case studies, tools that helps to really pull together our whole strategy. This is across the sort of building sector, highways, and this is work that we're sharing with our National Highways colleagues and our supply chain. It sets out really good ways that we're working with our partners across the board. David, next slide. Last but not least, just a couple of examples really of where we're trying to utilise some of this strategy. So we did lots of good work on the Mersey Gateway, smart motorways projects. There was some really good benefits across the board for National Highways and the supply chain of really trying to drive modern methods of construction in how we install our drainage units, how we lay the pavement, and trying to get really improved benefits. Lots of work on HS2 around highways of how we deliver structures, but then also on the smaller scale, bottom right. So whilst it's not on large scale, looking at ways of really sort of using precast elements to replace bridges more effectively without disturb. This is our M6 Loon Gorge project, where we're looking at sort of precast solutions within an existing bridge to avoid the need to sort of close the M6 for long periods of time. We're doing, and then in the bottom right, lining schemes to again avoid removing existing bridges and causing lots of problems for the members of the public. So lots of different ideas going on, but it's really overall a good collaboration between National Highways and the supply chain that we're all inputted into. So that's it from me, David.
Thank you, Jordan. I'll just swing across to the next and penultimate question on the Menti quiz, which is, what do you think audience designers could do to help deliver industrialised construction, modern methods of construction? So I'll leave that question open and just go back to make a comment, if I may, on Jordan's presentation. I was really interested. I know Kia very well, and I know the lots of good work they've done in terms of MMC and offsite. What struck me, Jordan, was your comment that you evaluate MMC solution against values, you said, the implication being that this isn't all about capital cost. And I absolutely agree that there are many ways of measuring the good value of some of these innovative solutions, whether that value is in reduced contract time, faster delivery, project certainty, higher quality. But there are even beyond that, there are a range of other value measures, which I think are very important. So in the last 2 years, the school has written 2 reports about how we feel that offsite construction can actually help enhance social value on projects, which is sort of counterintuitive because you're taking work away from the local construction area into a remote factory. Nevertheless, we believe there are ways that MMC delivers social value. Last year, we wrote a report on how we believe MMC can help drive down carbon in construction and infrastructure projects. And this year, I'm about to launch in October a report that I'm writing, which is based on the dissertation I wrote for my MSc in offsite construction, which is all around the well-being benefits to the workforce in using modern methods of construction. So really pleased, Jordan, that you mentioned values in the plural there. So thank you for that. Whilst you're just working on those Menti questions, audience, we want to go to the Q&A session now. But before we get into that, I'm going to leave you one last question to answer on the Menti, if I may, which is that I know National Highways is very keen to articulate some of the benefits and strategies and innovations that they have in mind. What, as an audience, suits you best in terms of the format for this type of event? And you can use your phone to rate these in order of preference, from short form webinars such as this of an hour or so duration, whether we just communicate with you through email or newsletters or similar, whether we do live face-to-face conferences or whether virtual conferences in a more extended version of what you're seeing today. So we'll leave you to have a think about that while I move away from the slides and the slide share. So I'm going to stop sharing for a moment. See whether there are any Q&As in our box. There aren't. So while you're multitasking with the Menti questions audience, please feel free to drop any questions in the Q&A box at the same time. So Manjit, I'll begin with you. We talked today about MMC and offsite, but we've also talked about industrialised construction. Do you want to talk to me about the decision National Highways made about the terminology and the favoured term there being industrialised construction?
There are two things there, actually, the reason we've moved to industrialised construction. The first one is the point that Michael made earlier, which is modern methods of construction gives the wrong impression because we're already doing some of the things that's encapsulated within that particular. It's a bit of a misnomer, isn't it? Modern methods of construction. The second one is in government. The terminology is moving from modern methods of construction more towards industrialised construction. And as Michael said earlier, it covers a wider umbrella of what we're trying to achieve, particularly around reaching the productivity challenge and overcoming that challenge.
Yeah.
So you will hear more about industrialised construction rather than what we're traditionally used to, which is the MMC.
Yeah. Okay, thanks, Manjit. So what I thought we could do now, if I go back to screen sharing, but what I'd like to do is go through the Menti poll and get you to have a look at some of the audience responses and get you to comment on what we're seeing. So let me just go back to the screen share. Okay, so the first question we asked our audience was, what are some of the barriers and challenges in MMC or industrialised construction adoption? What do we see? Any of our speakers? Anything that jumps out at you there?
Yeah, so I'm just going to say, I think there's a lot of this stuff depends on what you're going after. I said, I think if you're going after just products, so stuff that's off the shelf and we can go and collect and assemble on site, then I think those things are, let's just say, relatively standard. But when you start talking about integrating and trying to move things from to category towards category one, then there's a lot more integration required. So those procurement times, lead-in times, early stage design, ECI type contracts, all of that stuff, financial models start to change. All of those things are the things you have to know about. So if you're getting a design, you go start work on site, that's too late to do integrated approaches. You're going to change and create a lot of hassle. So if you're just going down product only type scenario, then crack on. But if you're wanting to do things differently, then you've got to bring the teams in earlier, the designs in earlier, understand how you're going to build, understand logistics, understand the full scope of what you want to do. So there's a lot of that stuff in that space that I think people have picked up on.
Yeah, thank you, Michael. A couple of jumping out at me. One, client being willing to take some risk on elements and not just wanting what's delivered before. Manjit, I don't know if you want to comment on that, but for me,
I will comment on
National
that.
Highways is very clear and articulated that you do encourage innovation.
We do encourage innovation, and the risk factor actually is a little bit misunderstood because although we do hand some of the risk off in terms of the way that the contract might be articulated, in essence, when something goes wrong, actually the risk always falls back to National Highways. The reputational risk falls back to us. Even the costings often fall back to us. So I think there is shared risk, although it might not be openly discussed and recognised, particularly around reputational risk always comes back to us, and the financial risk too, because we end up picking up the cost at the end of the day more often than not. So I think that's misunderstood is what I would say. And in essence, really, there should be shared risk.
Yeah.
The other thing I wanted to mention, in terms of the procurement model, people have mentioned that the model isn't right. Actually, our regional investment programme model, the model for the contract there, has the intent of that model was to get designers and contractors working together and taking that value chain approach and being much more integrated. I don't think the supply chains responded as well as it could have done to that. So one of the things we need to think about is, what are the barriers? What's stopping that integration? Is it the mindset? Is it the processes aren't in place? What, we need to think as an industry, what's really preventing us from bringing some of these innovations into our early designs? Why isn't it happening?
I think that's possibly reflected in this comment. One of the barriers is the audience, as stated, and not being involved in that early design process, which I think is always a prerequisite for successful MMC work. Lack of understanding of designers' ambitions and guidance, and having to accept clients' designs, in other words, to reverse engineer. So I think that's two sides of the same coin. Sorry, I'm interrupting.
Yes, sorry, David. Yeah, no, I'm with you. It comes back to sort of, I suppose, one of John's points was sort of start slow, build fast, and I suppose it is around that sort of at what point in the project you get involved. If you come in too late, it's quite difficult to really influence some of the really the industrialised construction that we're thinking. And I think Manjit's right. National Highways' intention was to really, part of the RDP programme and some of that wider work, to get people in really early, and in some places that's happened because it sort of worked out with the procurement times, and some not quite so. But I think getting the teams in early and collaborating, as early as possible. It sounds straightforward, but get National Highways, the contractors, the designers, all working together early, discussing that risk, and then you've got a good chance of really influencing some of the efficiencies that we all really want to grab. So I'm sure point to the project that we start is a really big one.
We have really moved on in our collaboration as an industry over the past 10, 15 years. We've gone from transactional to being much more collaborative. Now we just need to take that leap into being integrated.
Yeah. And then the other point, and I'll stop talking a minute, David, but the cost there, that popped up twice, hasn't it? And that's that sort of that value calculator, isn't it? Of again, I'm sure a lot of people are doing it across the industry. It isn't quite as simple as just straight.
And actually, coming back to the cost, one of the reports,
cost, and you've got
one of the reports that I looked at actually showed that what we're not doing very well, or we could do better on, we're losing opportunities. If we got better on the productivity piece, our investment into innovation would bring us more value. In comparison with other sectors, our productivity isn't rising in relation to the investment. So what, why is the productivity still staying lower if we're making that investment? What's happening? And we just need to uncover some of these things. And the productivity app that National Highways has launched, working with our suppliers, that will give us good insights into some of the issues that we're having to face.
Thank you, Manjit. I'll move on to the second question that we asked the audience, which was, what are some of the benefits that they in the audience, your supply chain, perceive? Faster delivery efficiency. Is there anyone, any of these particularly jumping out at any of you? I think I agree with them all. Are there any that the audience has missed?
Not particularly. I'm sorry, my internet might have cut out a little bit earlier on, so sorry about that. But just quick one. I've not seen customer yet, but I think that sort of builds into the sort of program Nationalised to maintain the network is a really difficult exercise to sort of keep the roads moving. So, where we talk about on here about faster program, that all goes hand in hand, doesn't it, with reducing customer impact. So that's a big part of what we want to try and achieve through some of these approaches, I think.
Yeah.
I think there's a sorry, David. I think there's another bit just to make sure that we're not driving to the lowest price possible, which is great. That's not a National Highways want as such. And I think some of this stuff is some of the tangible benefits and the intangible benefits of some of this stuff. And, we'll talk about lots of these things, but have we done enough to capture and record and demonstrate each of these things to make it much easier for those people that are signing off in procurement teams and bits and pieces that are signing off on ways of working or supply chain or whatever it might be, that this stuff is being is in the cost or is not in the cost, or there's those types of bits that we just need to remember that some of this safety isn't a cost that you see on the bottom line. It's not in there to say we're not going to kill people. That's not written. That's our license to operate, and how we go and become safer in how we go to work by doing things off-site or near-site or in a modular way. And you don't always get that in the price. And it's also just important that people that are responsible for commercials and bits and pieces is that they're listening to the whole project team when we talk about the benefits of these types of activities, and not just, well, that's 10% more expensive. Yeah, but the quality will be better, cost of quality and the safety will be better, and the way we go to work will be better. We'll have only 2 people on site, not 7 people on site. All of that stuff that sometimes we don't or haven't done enough to really capture and record all of those benefits properly. Is definitely something to consider.
Can I add one there as well on the
Of course.
One of the benefits that we've seen is the ability to work off projects to develop innovation. And if you're only ever building the same thing once, then there's no point in investing to improve something really. But if you've got the same process, you've got the repetition, you can do that. And one of the advantages we've seen is in, say, innovative materials or other elements of that in terms of modular bridge construction. You've then got the opportunity to then work with, and it's been really good having engagement with the National Highways SES teams to work at how we'd be able to get departures and standard in place off project, because there simply wouldn't be time on a project to do it. So that's a big benefit in terms of then allowing us to generate the less waste and the improved quality, the reduced carbon is that process. I think the downside is there's clearly an investment in doing that, and the process for getting that investment and how that is driven through is something that we need to think about as an industry, how we actually facilitate that and drive that on, as that is clearly a challenge to do that.
So what I'm seeing on this answer is that there are a wide range of benefits. What I saw from the first slide is perhaps the 3 C's, cost, culture and contracts, are inhibitors. So it'd be really interesting to see what the third response is what can the supply chain do to help overcome the barriers. The people who put in case studies, I absolutely agree. And I think to pick up what you just said, John, if we can show examples of success through this type of innovation using case studies, that will build confidence into the supply chain and particularly into the client base. Early engagement, yes, sorry.
Just to say on the case studies piece, so one of the bits that we're currently working through as the group is to understand where you sit vertically in a category, or where you sit in a category and vertically within a category, is the idea of going out to the supply chain and suppliers of things, and sort of asking for a technical and evidential response to how you meet a set of criteria, which we've written. And the idea at that point is that it'll all come back into the working group. We as a steering group will review those, and then we will allocate where we think it sits in the vertical space, just to drive consistency. So the idea isn't Kia, Balfours, Costain and Co are all going out to the same supply chain and saying, can I have an evidential and a technical response to all of your things? We do it as a collective group. So the supply chain are inundated with lots of stuff, but what we bring back to the party is that understanding of that database of information and case studies and demonstration. So when you are starting to look at designing something, you're going through that database and reviewing, and that's your lessons learned being brought back. That's our catalog of information. So, anyone out there that's interested and involved in that, please reach out, because, we're always looking for guinea pigs to help us, test that process.
Thank you. I just want to pick up on this note here that somebody hadn't got time to type and listen and makes notes, and I absolutely understand that. What I will do is leave this Menti poll open. So if you want to, after the session, go to menti.com and type in that 8-digit code. That will allow you to contribute to each of these slides, even after the event, and we'll leave that open for the rest of this afternoon. I must begin to draw the session to a close. I would, first of all, like to say to anyone in the audience who needs to understand more about this topic, just go to supplychainschool.co.uk/topics/offsite. We've got hundreds and thousands of resources to help you. I'd like to thank Manjit, Jordan, Michael and John for great presentations. I hope, audience, that's helped you understand not only National Highways strategy and thinking, but how this not only requires a change of perhaps contractual arrangements, but a change of mindset and culture. And as a client, they really want to work with you, and they really want to get you to help them derive these benefits that we can all identify. I get in terrible trouble with the supply chain school if I overrun. So Manjit, I will give you the last word on the session in 30 seconds or less.
I just wanted to say thanks to my co-presenters. Again, to say that, we have got a working group. We do want contributions. And if you've got ideas, and even the case studies would be great, because we are building a bank of case studies. But thanks to everyone for listening.